One punch, and a tournament's over before the crowd even sits down. That's the image burned into your head right from the jump. Some unranked ghost of a fighter steps into a ring against an S-rank favorite, throws a single hit, and the guy's airborne. Gone. Announcer's mic goes dead silent because there's nothing left to announce. Cut to a poison sea that melts steel on contact, and instead of swimming for his life, this same guy is just standing there letting it wash over him like it's a spa day. Cut to a restaurant that used to be a demon nest, now serving hot food to the same monsters that tried to eat the last owner. Because apparently our hero looked at a den of killers and thought, yeah, this could be a business. Cut to a snake the size of a building getting punched in the face, on purpose, for what turns out to be roughly 100 years straight. And then cut to the one line that flips this whole story upside down. A messenger from a war god casually mentioning that maybe, just maybe, none of the last few centuries were ever supposed to happen. That the guy wasn't being trained at all. That he was just lost. So who is this guy? And how does someone go from forgettable tournament entrant to cosmic beings are taking notes on him? Let's rewind all the way back, because the start of this story could not look less like the ending. His name's Choi Yun-sung, and on paper, he's about as unremarkable as hunters get. C rank, bottom rung. No elemental affinity, no ancient bloodline, no legendary weapon passed down from a dead grandfather. Just fists, and a stubborn refusal to use anything else. See, in Choi's world, Earth's been fused to a nightmare dimension called the Abyss for a while now, and humanity survives by sending hunters into monster-infested dungeons to keep the lights on. Most of those hunters lean on magic. Fireballs, barriers, summons, the works. Magic scales fast, looks flashy, and gets you sponsorships. Martial arts, on the other hand, get you laughed at. Choi picked martial arts anyway. Doesn't matter that actual professionals tell him to his face that swinging fists in a world of magic missiles is basically bringing a butter knife to a gunfight. Doesn't matter that his rank sits at the bottom while hunters half as dedicated as him climb past C rank using shortcuts and borrowed power. He trains like none of that matters, because to him, none of that matters. He's got exactly one obsession running his entire life. Get stronger. Not for fame, not for money, just because being weak, in his experience, gets people killed. And he'd know, because he grew up with nobody. No parents, no safety net, nothing to fall back on except whatever strength he could build with his own two hands. That single-minded focus costs him things. He had a girlfriend once, didn't survive the relationship because, sorry, I was training, stops being a cute excuse real fast. There's no blow-up, no cheating scandal, just two people slowly realizing one of them loves reps more than dates. Choi barely registers it as a loss. Back to the gym. The one person who actually worries about him is his clan leader, who spends half his energy trying to talk Choi out of picking fights way above his pay grade. Every time Choi limps back from some suicidal spar, the guy's there going, "Are you trying to get yourself killed?" And every time, Choi just grins and does it again next week. Then one night, sleep turns into something else entirely. Choi's standing in front of a goddess, an actual capital G goddess of balance, and she's not here for a friendly chat. She tells him she's seen a disaster barreling toward humanity, something catastrophic enough that she's been searching for someone, anyone, capable of standing against it. And out of every S-rank legend, every famous clan head, every hunter with a wall of trophies, she picks him. Some no-name C-ranker nobody would recognize on the street. She offers him a deal. Step into the abyss, train in a space she's personally prepared, grow strong enough to matter when the crisis hits. Choi doesn't need convincing. The second she says get stronger, he's already halfway through the contract. No hesitation, no questions about the fine print. This is the opportunity of a lifetime and he knows it. And just like that, Earth loses him. He's pulled straight into the abyss, a realm so massive it makes dungeons look like broom closets. Home to monsters, angels, actual gods, and beings called constellations who run entire territories like personal empires. The goddess has a controlled, protected space waiting for him. Safe boundaries, careful pacing. The kind of setup where a C-rank human could realistically survive long enough to grow. He never sets foot in it. The instant he crosses into the abyss, a mana storm detonates around the transfer point. And this isn't weather, this is raw destructive energy on a scale that erases anything caught inside it. It grabs Choi before he can even orient himself and flings him somewhere the goddess never planned for. somewhere off her map entirely. Here's where the story turns from inspiring underdog tale into something much funnier and much darker at the same time. Choi has absolutely no idea anything's gone wrong. 0. As far as he's concerned, this insane storm ripping through his body is just an aggressive opening exercise. So instead of trying to survive it, he leans in. He starts pulling that storm's raw energy into himself, absorbing it the way you'd chug an energy drink before a workout. By every law of nature, that should turn him into paste. Instead, something in his body starts rewriting itself. Meanwhile, the goddess is standing in her carefully prepared training ground, staring at empty space where a hunter's supposed to be. He's not there. He was never going to be there. What she doesn't know yet is that this is the start of a search that's about to stretch across centuries. Neither of them has the faintest clue what just happened to the other. That gap, Choi thinking everything's going according to plan while the goddess realizes she's already lost him, is going to define this entire story. When the storm finally burns itself out, Choi's left standing in some unfamiliar stretch of the abyss, bruised, buzzing with strange new energy, and grinning like he just finished day 1 of the greatest training camp ever designed. First lesson down, he thinks. Bring on lesson 2. He doesn't have to wait long. Something enormous is already watching him from the shadows of that landscape. Coiled, ancient, easily strong enough to erase him in a single strike. To any sane person, this thing would be an instant kill screen. Choi takes one look at it and thinks, perfect, my next training partner. The creature is a stone serpent, and calling it dangerous undersells it. This is an A-rank monster, the kind of threat that would send veteran hunter squads running for reinforcements. Scales like armor plating, a body long enough to flatten a city block, and an attitude that says it's eaten things far scarier than one skinny martial artist. It lunges. Choi doesn't dodge. Choi punches it in the face. Obviously, that goes about as well as you'd expect the first 100 times. He gets thrown, crushed, buried, launched into rock walls hard enough to leave dents shaped like a person. Any reasonable being would take the hint and run. Choi takes the hint and comes back the next day to punch it again. This is where the story slides into one of its funniest stretches, because Choi genuinely, unironically believes this murder snake is his instructor. He talks to it like a strict teacher. He thanks it after getting nearly folded in half. He treats every near-death mauling as constructive feedback on his footwork. The serpent, for its part, seems less like it's training him and more like it's just extremely done with this guy who won't take a hint. Except every day, that hint gets harder to land, because every day, Choi's a little tougher to put down. That's the whole engine of the divine celestial technique, the style Choi's been building his whole life. It doesn't care about talent, doesn't care about elemental affinity, doesn't care if the universe thinks martial arts are outdated. It runs entirely on repetition. Throw the same punch enough times, absorb enough impact, survive enough hits, and the body starts converting all of it into something the story calls inner strength, or ki, a power source completely separate from magic, generated from inside rather than pulled from the world outside. Where mages draw mana from their surroundings, martial artists like Choi generate their strength through sheer repeated punishment. It's slow, it's brutal, and against something like this serpent, it's the only thing keeping him alive long enough to improve. So the fights keep happening, dozens, then hundreds. What starts as an obvious mismatch slowly stops looking so obvious. The serpent's strikes that used to send Choi flying start landing with less effect. His own punches start leaving cracks instead of bruises on his own knuckles. Somewhere in this stretch, something inside him clicks. The kind of quiet internal breakthrough that doesn't come with fireworks. Just a sudden sense that his body finally understands something it didn't understand yesterday. That's a key breakthrough, and it means his next 100 punches are going to land harder than the last 100 combined. Time keeps sliding by. And this is where the recap has to zoom out, because we're not talking days or months anymore. We're talking decades. An entire chunk of this guy's life gets swallowed by one extended brawl against one monster, and somehow it never gets boring, because every stretch of time skipped forward drops him back in with a new technique, a new evolution, a body that can shrug off things that used to nearly kill him. And slowly, something shifts between them that's harder to name than rival or training partner. The serpent stops attacking with the intent to kill and starts attacking with something closer to genuine effort. Like it respects this idiot enough to actually try now. Choi, for his part, starts treating it less like an obstacle and more like the closest thing he's had to family since he lost his actual one. There's no big dramatic speech where they declare themselves friends. It just happens. One punch, one shared meal of whatever passes for food out here, one long silent stretch of mutual respect at a time. Eventually, Choi gives it a name, Onyx. And Onyx, somewhere along the way, stops being the terrifying A-rank threat that nearly killed him on day one and becomes something closer to a partner, a monster willing to carry him across terrain that would otherwise take weeks to cross on foot, a companion who watches his back during the parts of the abyss too dangerous to face without backup. Neither of them planned for any of this. That's kind of the whole joke and the whole heart of this section at the same time. Choi wandered into what should have been a death sentence, misunderstood it as a lesson plan, and came out the other side with both a brand new fighting style and the first real friend he's had in years. But the deeper the abyss goes, the worse it gets. Somewhere past the serpent's territory sits a poison sea vast enough to dissolve anything that touches it, a stretch of the map that, by every rule this world runs on, should be an instant death zone for a human. And Choi, fresh off decades of punching a monster into friendship, looks at that toxic ocean and does the exact thing you'd expect by now. He walks straight in. The moment his skin touches that water, alarms should be going off in every nerve in his body. This sea doesn't just poison, it doesn't discriminate, it doesn't wait, it eats through flesh like acid through paper, and creatures that fall in usually don't come back out in one piece, if they come out at all. Choi wades in like he's testing bathwater. The pain hits instantly. Not a sting, a full-body assault, like his blood's been swapped for fire. Anyone else would be scrambling for the shore. Choi grits his teeth, plants his feet, and keeps walking deeper. This is the part of the story where his whole philosophy gets tested at its most extreme. Every other trial so far has at least resembled combat. Something to punch, something to out-stubborn. Poison doesn't care about stubbornness. Poison just works, slow and quiet, whether you're tough or not. But Choi spent decades converting outside force into inner strength, and as far as his body's concerned, this toxic sea is just another storm to absorb. So instead of trying to survive the poison, he starts doing what he always does, pulling it in, letting it burn through him, forcing his body to adapt or die trying. For a long stretch, it looks like dying's winning. He collapses more than once, body seizing, skin blistering, barely crawling back to shallow water before the next attempt. But barely surviving has never once stopped this guy from getting up the next morning and walking back in. Days turn into years. Years turn into a length of time the story doesn't even bother giving an exact number to. Just a wall of repeated agony, submerged again and again, body rebuilding itself a little tougher each time. And slowly, agonizingly, the burn starts to fade. What used to feel like fire starts feeling like static, then like nothing at all. By the time he walks out of that sea for good, poison doesn't hurt him anymore. Full stop. What was designed to kill him on contact has become something his body simply shrugs off. And it doesn't stop there, because eventually Choi starts pulling poison into his own attacks, turning what should have been his execution method into one more weapon in his arsenal. The thing built to end him becomes something he ends up wielding. It's a full flip. Environment that should have been an instant death sentence turns into one more upgrade, filed away next to the mana storm and the century of punching a giant snake. But not everything from this stretch of the story is a win. Onyx can't follow him here. The poison sea, and everything deeper past it, is simply too dangerous for a creature built for the terrain back where they met. So this is where they part ways. There's no dramatic final battle, no forced tragedy. Just two beings who've spent decades together quietly understanding that the road ahead isn't one they can walk side by side anymore. Choi doesn't get flowery about it. That's not who he is, but there's a real weight in that goodbye. A version of him that's clearly more attached to this monster than he'd probably admit out loud. Onyx doesn't fight him on it, just watches him go. The way you'd watch someone you raised walk off to a place you can't follow. It's quiet. It's the kind of scene that doesn't need a single line of dialogue to hit, and it hits anyway. And with that, Choi keeps moving deeper into the abyss. Alone again, but nowhere near the same person who walked in at the start. What waits for him past the poison sea is a completely different kind of nightmare. The domain of blood and war, territory ruled by a constellation who treats combat as something close to religious law. This isn't a stretch of wilderness with the occasional monster ambush. This is an entire region built around endless conflict, crawling with demons who exist mostly to fight, kill, and repeat. Choi walks into that domain the same way he's walked into everything else, like it's a gym with unusually rude staff. Fights come at him constantly here, not the occasional threat. A non-stop rotation of demons testing him, probing him, trying to take him out before he can get comfortable. And here's where his growth actually starts showing instead of just getting summarized. Every clash in this domain moves faster, hits harder, and Choi's handling it. Demons that would have flattened him back when he first entered the abyss are getting matched blow for blow, and some of them are losing outright. At some point in this endless string of fights, Choi stumbles across a restaurant. Except stumbles across, undersells it, because the place is currently occupied by a pack of monsters who've clearly claimed it as their own personal turf. Most people would take one look and go find literally anywhere else to rest. Choi looks at a demon-infested restaurant and thinks, well, this could be mine. So he fights for it. Clears it out floor by floor, demon by demon, until the last one's either fled or been knocked flat, and then, completely straight-faced, declares himself the new owner, renames the place, calls it the Demon Inn, and then, because apparently conquering a building full of monsters wasn't a strange enough flex, he starts cooking there, learns actual recipes, starts serving food to demons. The same demons who, in some cases, tried to kill him the week before. This arc is where the story finally lets its foot off the gas for a minute. And it's a welcome breather after the poison sea and the endless blood and war skirmishes. There's a real comedic rhythm to watching Choi run a restaurant in the middle of a war zone, casually serving meals to monsters between training sessions, treating repeat demon customers like regulars at a neighborhood diner. It's absurd. It's also weirdly wholesome, in the specific way this story keeps managing to be wholesome in situations that should be anything but. Not every demon that shows up wants dinner, though. Plenty still come looking for a fight. The domain doesn't stop being what it is just because Choi's got a menu now, and every single one of those fights becomes another training rep. Demon invasions roll through the inn on a rotating basis, and Choi handles wave after wave, using every single one as another opportunity to sharpen the divine celestial technique. His punches get faster, his footwork tightens, new variations of his old moves start emerging out of nowhere, born entirely out of raw repetition rather than any teacher ever explaining a single thing to him. And here's where the relationship with the demons themselves starts to shift, which honestly ends up being one of the more satisfying threads running through this whole stretch. What starts as straightforward hostility, demons trying to kill an intruder, gradually curdles into something closer to grudging respect. He keeps beating them, he keeps not dying. Eventually, some of them stop trying to actually finish him off and start showing up, just to test themselves against him, like he's become the local measuring stick for how strong you actually are in this domain. Some of these demons become regulars in the truest sense, showing up for a meal, then a fair one-on-one fight, then heading back out like it's just another Tuesday. The Demon Inn turns into this bizarre hybrid space, half restaurant, half sparring ground, run entirely by a human who wandered in from another dimension and decided the correct response to constant danger was to open a business. Centuries pass this way. The narration doesn't dwell on every single meal or every single brawl. It can't. There's simply too much ground to cover. But every jump forward in time drops Choi back in a little stronger, a little more feared, a little more respected by the very monsters who once tried to erase him. Legendary breakthroughs start piling up. Skills that started at the bottom of the rank ladder, D, then C, start climbing toward B, then flirting with A. Each jump another quiet confirmation that everyone who ever mocked martial arts as a dead-end path back on Earth had absolutely no idea what they were talking about. By the time this section of the story winds down, Choi isn't just surviving in the domain of blood and war. He's practically a fixture of it. A human running a restaurant in a war zone, beating demons for sport, cooking them dinner afterward, and somehow making all of it look completely normal. But normal doesn't last. Something's about to walk through that door that isn't looking for a meal or a friendly spar. Something sent directly by the constellation who rules this entire domain. And this one's not here to test him. This one's here to recruit him. And if Choi says no, it's here to make sure he never leaves. The demon that walks into the Demon Inn that day doesn't order food, doesn't line up for a spar, just stands in the doorway with the kind of presence that makes every other demon in the room go quiet at once. an aura sitting somewhere between formal messenger and unspoken threat. His name is Varagos, and he doesn't work for just any constellation. He's the harbinger of the dominator of blood and war, the very being whose domain Choi's been living in, fighting in, and apparently running a small business inside for the past few centuries. Varagos has one job: recruit talent worth recruiting, and drag home anyone who refuses. He's looked at plenty of demons over the years and found most of them unworthy of his master's attention. Then word reached him about a human running a restaurant in the middle of a war zone, casually demolishing wave after wave of invaders like it's an afternoon chore. Varagos came to see for himself. What he finds isn't what he expected. He expected some overhyped brawler riding a lucky streak. Instead, he finds someone who's clearly spent centuries turning himself into a weapon through nothing but pure repetition. No magic, no artifact, no divine blessing. Just fists that have been thrown so many times they've rewritten the body throwing them. Varagos gets straight to the offer. Join the dominator of blood and war. Become part of the family. Fight under a constellation who could turn Choi's raw talent into something monumentally more powerful than anything he's built alone. It's not a small ask. Becoming a constellation servant means access to power on a completely different tier. The kind of leap that could take decades of solo grinding and compress it into a fraction of the time. For most hunters, this would be the easiest yes of their life. Choi says no. Not out of arrogance, not out of some grand ideological stand. He just doesn't want power handed to him. Everything he's built with his own two fists, one punch at a time, and something about accepting a shortcut this late feels like it would cheapen every scar that got him here. Varagos doesn't take rejection well. The offer, it turns out, was never really optional in the first place. Join willingly, or get broken and dragged in anyway. But before things escalate to blows, Varagos says something that lands far harder than any punch could. He tells Choi the truth, or at least the version of it that's been floating around higher circles of the abyss for a while now. That elaborate, carefully designed training regimen Choi's been convinced he's been living through this entire time? It was never real. There was no plan for the mana storm. No plan for the serpent, the poison sea, any of it. Choi wasn't following the goddess's design. He got swept away from it entirely, the very first moment he arrived, and everything since has been him surviving accidents, not completing lessons. For the first time in this entire story, Choi doesn't have a comeback. It's not the kind of hit he's used to taking. He can absorb a mana storm, punch through poison, out-stubborn a monster 3 times his size. None of that prepared him for the possibility that centuries of suffering, growth, and sacrifice might not have meant anything at all. That the goddess who chose him for this destiny has spent this entire time searching for a hunter she lost within seconds of the deal being made. That every hardship he framed as purposeful might just have been chaos he happened to survive. It's a gut punch dressed up as a passing comment, and it shakes him in a way nothing in the abyss has managed until now. But, and this matters, because it's exactly the kind of guy Choi is, the shake doesn't turn into despair, it turns into clarity. If none of this was ever the plan, if he's been out here on borrowed time this entire stretch, then there's exactly one thing left to do. Stop wasting more of it. Go home. Find the goddess. Figure out what actually happens next, on his own terms, instead of drifting further into a realm he was never supposed to be lost in for this long. He tells Varagos he's leaving. Varagos doesn't step aside. If Choi won't join willingly, then Varagos has his orders. Bring him back one way or another, and if he has to be broken first, that's simply the cost of doing business for a harbinger of blood and war. The Demon Inn, this weird, cozy little pocket of stability Choi carved out of a war zone, is about to become the site of the single biggest fight of his life. The clash starts fast, and immediately it's obvious this isn't one of the demon skirmishes Choi's been grinding through for centuries. Varagos moves like someone who's fought constellation-tier threats before and walked away standing. His strikes carry weight that makes the ground crack on impact. He's not testing Choi's limits the way the stone serpent once did. He's actively trying to end this as fast as possible. And for the first stretch of the fight, it works. Choi gets thrown around in ways he hasn't experienced since his earliest days against Onyx. Driven through walls of the inn he built himself, slammed into the ground hard enough to crater it, forced onto the defensive against an opponent who simply hits harder and moves faster than anything he's faced in this domain before. But here's the thing about a guy who's spent centuries treating every near-death situation as a lesson plan. Getting overwhelmed doesn't make him panic. it makes him adapt. Every hit that connects teaches his body something new about Varagos's rhythm. Every attack he barely survives feeds straight back into the same engine that's been building him this entire time. Ki, drawn from impact, from pressure, from the raw act of getting hit and refusing to stay down. Slowly, the fight starts shifting. Choi starts reading Varagos's openings a fraction faster. His counters start landing with more force behind them. Where the fight opened with Choi purely on defense, cracks start appearing. Moments where he actually pushes Varagos back, where his fists start leaving marks instead of just absorbing damage. Varagos notices. And Varagos, for all his confidence walking in, starts realizing this fight isn't the formality he assumed it would be. The battle keeps escalating from there, each exchange bigger than the last, each new evolution in Choi's fighting style, forcing Varagos to dig deeper into his own reserves. Somewhere out past the Demon Inn, in places far beyond either of their sight, other eyes are starting to turn toward this fight. Constellations who rule other corners of the abyss, curious about the human who's apparently strong enough to make a harbinger of blood and war actually fight for his life. The fight keeps climbing, and it climbs in a way that stops feeling like a spar and starts feeling like something closer to an event. Varagos throws a strike that cracks open the ground for 100 feet in every direction. The kind of hit that should end anything standing in front of it. Choi takes it head-on, feet skidding, arms shaking from the force, and instead of going down, he grins through the pain like this is exactly the kind of resistance he's been chasing his whole life. That grin unsettles Varagos more than any counterattack could. This is not how a dying man is supposed to look. What's happening inside Choi right now isn't just adaptation anymore, it's transformation. Every hit he eats, every ounce of force Varagos throws at him, gets pulled inward and converted. The same trick that turned a mana storm into fuel and a poison sea into immunity. Except this time the source isn't a natural disaster or an ancient monster. It's a being with actual Constellation tier backing, throwing attacks built to end Constellation tier threats. And Choi's body is treating all of it like protein. Something shifts. It's not loud, it's not flashy. There's no glowing aura bursting off him, no dramatic scream toward the sky. It's quieter than that, and somehow scarier. His stance settles. His breathing evens out. The next punch he throws doesn't just connect. It staggers Varagos, actually staggers him, forces him back a full step for the first time since this fight started. Varagos has fought plenty of things in his long, violent existence. He's fought hunters chasing glory, monsters chasing survival, even a handful of lesser constellations testing their limits against him. None of them made him take a step back like that. He looks at Choi, really looks, past the beaten-up martial artist he assumed he was dealing with, and starts to understand he badly misjudged what walked into that restaurant. The fight resets around that realization. Varagos stops holding anything in reserve. What follows isn't a beatdown anymore. It's two forces genuinely trying to match each other, blow for blow, each escalation forcing the next. Varagos calls on more of his own power, something that makes the air around him thicken, pressure building like the whole domain is bracing for what comes next. His strikes start carrying weight that could flatten a building without touching it directly, pure force radiating outward from every swing. Choi meets it anyway, and every time he does, that same quiet internal click happens again. Another breakthrough. Another evolution stacking on top of the last one, faster now than it's ever come before, like his body's been storing up centuries of pressure and finally found an opponent worth spending it all on. Somewhere in the middle of this, an old memory flickers through him. Not words, not a full scene, just a flash of scaled hide and slow, deliberate movement. Onyx. The serpent who taught him, without ever meaning to, that getting hit doesn't have to mean losing. He doesn't dwell on it, there's no time to. But it's there, underneath everything. The ghost of 100 years of getting punched by something bigger than him and refusing to stay down. That's the whole foundation this fight is standing on. Varagos throws something bigger, a strike wrapped in enough raw force to tear a canyon into the landscape. The kind of attack that isn't meant to wound, it's meant to erase. Choi doesn't dodge it, doesn't try to. He steps into it instead, meets it with a punch of his own, and for one suspended second, the two forces collide directly, energy screaming outward in every direction. The Demon Inn's remains finally giving out completely under the shockwave. When the dust settles, both of them are still standing. Barely, on Varagos's end. Genuinely barely, for the first time in a fight he assumed would be over in minutes. That's when the domain of blood and war starts changing around them. Demons who once tried to kill Choi on sight are now gathering at a careful distance, watching a fight that's rewriting what they thought was possible for a human. Some of the ones who became his sparring regulars over the centuries are among them, the ones he cooked for, trained against, earned grudging respect from one bout at a time. None of them are cheering. This isn't the kind of fight you cheer at. It's the kind you watch in stunned silence, because you're witnessing something that doesn't happen twice. And further out, past the borders of this domain, past the reach of ordinary sight, something else starts paying attention. Constellations. Beings who normally wouldn't waste a passing thought on a single human hunter suddenly find their focus dragged toward this one fight, drawn by the sheer scale of power being thrown around inside it. Word travels fast among beings who've existed since before Earth connected to the abyss, and the word spreading now is simple. There's a human in the domain of blood and war, fighting like something more than human. None of them fully understand what they're looking at yet. Is he a servant nobody registered? A hidden bloodline finally surfacing? Or something rarer? Someone climbing toward constellation-level power through nothing but sheer accumulated will, without a single divine shortcut along the way? Viragos is asking himself some version of the same question, mid-fight, mid-exchange, blood running from a cut across his brow that absolutely should not be there against a human opponent. He came here to recruit a promising fighter, or break one who refused. He didn't come prepared to find out he might be standing across from someone who's already outgrown the category he put him in. The dominator of blood and war, the constellation Viragos serves, is watching too, somewhere far beyond this battlefield, weighing what to do about a human who's turning out to be a lot more than a recruitment target. If Viragos can't bring him back willingly, and can't beat him by force, the Dominator's options start narrowing fast, and none of the remaining ones are simple. Choi doesn't know any of this is happening, doesn't know constellations are watching, doesn't know the Dominator himself is reconsidering. All he knows is the fight in front of him, the rhythm of it, the fact that every exchange makes him feel a little more like the version of himself he's been chasing since the day he stepped through that mana storm and mistook it for training. Underneath all of it, something quieter is stirring too. If Viragos told him the truth, if his centuries here really were an accident, not a plan, then somewhere out there the goddess of balance is still searching, still hasn't found him. Atacaniel, her faithful angel, still hasn't crossed paths with him despite what's clearly been an enormous, exhausting search stretching across just as much time as Choi's spent down here. That thought doesn't slow him down. If anything, it sharpens him. Every reason he has to end this fight and get back to the surface is a reason to hit harder, right now. Viragos throws another attack, bigger than the last, forcing Choi backward through the last standing wall of what used to be the Demon Inn, the restaurant he built out of nothing, the closest thing to a home he's had since Earth. The building comes down around them in the exchange, centuries of quiet routine reduced to rubble in a single clash. Choi doesn't flinch at losing it. If anything, watching it fall lights something sharper in him. Everything he built here, he built through repetition and stubbornness and refusing to quit. And that's exactly what's going to get him through this fight too. He plants his feet in the wreckage of his own restaurant and comes back at Viragos harder than before. The two of them collide again, and this time the shockwave alone is enough to level what little terrain was still standing around them. Viragos is breathing hard now, something he clearly isn't used to doing against anyone. Choi's breathing hard too, but there's something different in his eyes. Less desperation, more focus, like every exchange is bringing him closer to a version of himself he's never quite reached before. Something is building toward a breaking point. Not the end of the fight, this is nowhere near over, but the edge of something bigger. Choi can feel it coming, that same sensation he's felt right before every previous breakthrough, except amplified past anything he's experienced in this abyss so far. Whatever's about to happen next isn't going to be a small step forward. It's going to be the moment he stops being simply the strongest martial artist anyone in this domain has ever seen, and starts becoming something the word human doesn't quite cover anymore. It happens between one heartbeat and the next. Choi takes a hit that should end him. A strike from Viragos wrapped in enough force to have flattened 3 city blocks, force that's already put craters the size of houses into the ground around them, and instead of going down, something inside him simply refuses the outcome, not through willpower alone. Through centuries of exactly this, pressure, absorption, transformation, repeated so many times that his body's forgotten how to respond any other way. His skin doesn't just hold, it answers back. For one suspended second, everything goes quiet in a way that has nothing to do with sound. Varagos feels it before he sees it. A shift in the air pressure around his opponent, like something enormous just settled into the space Choi's standing in. When Choi looks up again, the exhaustion that had been creeping into his stance for the last several exchanges is gone. Not masked. Gone. He doesn't announce it. He doesn't need to. The next punch he throws doesn't just stagger Varagos. It puts him flat on his back for the first time in this entire fight, skidding across broken stone that used to be the floor of a restaurant that served demon stew on slow afternoons. Varagos gets back up fast, more out of instinct than confidence, and when he looks at Choi now, he's not looking at a stubborn human anymore. Something about the way Choi's standing, the way the air moves differently around him, tells Varagos he just watched a threshold get crossed that very few beings ever cross in their entire existence. Mortal to something else, right in front of him, mid-fight, without ceremony. This is the kind of moment the skeleton calls transcending mortal limits, and it doesn't come with fanfare. No golden light, no dramatic roar to the heavens. Just a martial artist who spent centuries treating every disaster as a lesson, finally arriving at the lesson underneath all the other lessons. That there was never really a ceiling to begin with, only how much a person's willing to survive to find that out. Varagos steadies himself and comes back in anyway, because retreat was never really an option for a harbinger sent to either recruit or subdue, and because some part of him still refuses to believe this fight's already slipping out of his hands. The next exchange is faster than anything that's come before it. Choi's movements have changed. Where he used to absorb hits and grind forward through sheer stubbornness, now he's reading Varagos' attacks before they fully commit, closing distance faster than a being of his supposed level should be physically capable of. Every clash from here rewrites the terrain around them further. What's left of the Demon Inn's foundation finally gives out entirely, swallowed into a crater neither of them consciously created. Demons watching from a careful distance start pulling back even further, sensing that whatever's happening now has outgrown anything they should be standing anywhere near. And far beyond the borders of this domain, the attention Choi's fight already drew starts sharpening into something more focused. Constellations who'd been idly registering a strange disturbance now find themselves watching directly, recalculating what exactly they're looking at. A human who wandered into the abyss by accident, misunderstood every catastrophe as training, and just crossed a threshold most beings spend entire lifetimes trying and failing to reach. The dominator of blood and war, watching his own harbinger get pushed onto the back foot by someone who was never even supposed to survive this long down here, starts weighing options that go well beyond simple recruitment. A being who views battle as absolute law doesn't take kindly to being denied a servant, but he also doesn't take kindly to underestimating something that's clearly become dangerous enough to matter. Choi doesn't know any of that calculus is happening several layers above this fight. All he knows is the ground under his feet, the opponent in front of him, and a feeling settling into his chest that's completely unfamiliar after everything he's survived. Not exhaustion, not fear, but something closer to certainty. Whatever the goddess originally planned for him, whatever accident actually stranded him here, he's arrived somewhere neither of them could have predicted. And he's not stopping now. Not when Earth is still waiting, not when there's still a goddess out there who spent centuries searching for a hunter she lost within seconds of sending him through. Varagos comes at him again, and this time there's less confidence behind it and more desperation. The kind of attack thrown by someone realizing the fight they walked into isn't the fight they're currently standing in. Choi meets him head-on, and the resulting collision sends a shockwave rippling outward that finally reaches territory well beyond the domain of blood and war itself, far enough that it registers, however faintly, in places that have absolutely nothing to do with this particular constellation's rule. Somewhere among those ripples, an old, faithful presence stirs. An angel who has spent centuries combing every corner of this endless realm for a single hunter, following leads that led nowhere, chasing rumors that turned to dust, still refusing to give up the search even after all this time. Adakaniel feels something shift in the currents of the abyss. Something powerful enough, human enough, that it doesn't match the profile of any known constellation or ancient monster. Something that might, against every realistic expectation, actually be him. The search isn't over, but for the first time in longer than anyone's been counting, there's finally a thread worth following. Back in the crater that used to be a restaurant, Choi and Varagos collide again, harder than every exchange before it combined, and the fight that started as a recruitment attempt has become something far bigger than either of them walked in expecting. A battle that's already begun rewriting how every power watching from the shadows understands exactly what a human being is capable of becoming. Neither combatant is backing down, neither fight is anywhere close to finished, and somewhere beyond the edge of this domain, the search that spans centuries might finally be closing in. Viragos doesn't know how to process what's happening to him. Constellations don't send harbingers on missions that end in embarrassment. They send them because the outcome is supposed to be certain. Recruit the target or break the target. Those were his only two acceptable results walking into this fight. Right now, neither one looks like where this is heading. He digs deeper into whatever reserves a being of his rank keeps in the tank for genuine emergencies, and the air around him thickens again, pressure climbing to a level that makes even the watching demons take another step back. This is Viragos stopping the sandbagging entirely, not testing, not measuring, just throwing everything he has left at the one problem standing in front of him. The strike that follows tears a line through the crater floor wide enough to swallow a house. Choi's already moving before it lands, faster than his body should physically allow, closing distance instead of creating it, meeting Viragos in the middle of his own attack instead of trying to escape it. That's the difference centuries of this specific brand of insanity built into him. Where a normal fighter dodges the freight train, Choi spent his whole life learning how to become the wall it hits. And lately, more and more, the wall that hits back harder. His fist connects with something solid this time, actual resistance instead of the near misses from earlier exchanges, and the impact rings out across the crater like a bell the size of a mountain. Viragos staggers, catches himself, and for the first time since this fight began, there's something in his expression that isn't confidence or fury, it's closer to recognition. The kind that comes right before someone stops fighting an opponent and starts fighting for their own survival instead. He doesn't get much time to sit with that realization before Choi's on him again. What follows isn't a clean exchange of blows so much as controlled chaos. Two forces well past anything resembling a normal fight, trading hits that would have ended most beings several times over in the opening seconds. Every strike Choi lands teaches his body something new in real time, and every lesson gets folded straight back into the next punch. It's the same loop that's carried him this entire story. Problem, absorption, breakthrough, bigger problem. Except now the loop is spinning fast enough that Viragos can barely keep pace with how quickly his opponent keeps changing shape mid-fight. Somewhere in the middle of this exchange, Viragos throws a question instead of a punch. Not out loud, not in words Choi can hear over the sound of the fight, but in the kind of internal reckoning that happens when a being who's spent his existence, certain of humanity's limitations, watches those limitations get shattered directly in front of him. He came here believing humans were, at best, useful tools for a constellation's collection. He's leaving this fight, assuming he leaves it at all, with a very different understanding of what a human being pushed far enough can actually become. That shift matters. It's not redemption. Not exactly. Viragos hasn't stopped trying to win, hasn't dropped his mission, hasn't suddenly decided Choi's a friend, but something in how he fights changes in these final exchanges. Less contempt behind the strikes. More genuine effort, the kind you only bring out for an opponent you've stopped underestimating. The battlefield keeps expanding around them as the fight goes on, cratering further into what used to be a quiet stretch of the domain of blood and war. Watching demons, some of them regulars who used to line up politely for a meal and a sparring match at the inn, stand at the farthest edge of the destruction, witnessing something that's clearly outgrown anything they've ever seen a human accomplish. A few of them, the story suggests, are already starting to understand they've been training under someone who was always going to end up here eventually. That the guy serving them stew between fights was never just a guy serving stew. Further out, past the reach of this domain entirely, the attention gathering around this fight keeps sharpening. More than one constellation has now noticed the disturbance rippling outward from what should have been a routine recruitment mission. Whispers move fast among beings who measure time in centuries rather than years, and the whisper spreading now carries real weight. Something down in the domain of blood and war just crossed a line most things never cross at all. The dominator of blood and war himself watches his harbinger get pushed to genuine extremes by a target he expected to be a simple acquisition, and starts recalculating everything about how this encounter should end. A being who treats combat as absolute law doesn't walk away from a fight this significant without some kind of decision. Recruit him properly this time, escalate the response entirely, or accept that this human has already outgrown easy categorization. None of that reaches Choi directly, He's locked entirely into the fight in front of him, into the rhythm of an opponent who keeps adapting just as fast as he does, into the sensation of a body that keeps discovering new limits, only to blow past them again a few exchanges later. Every hit that lands, every hit he survives, keeps pulling him further from the C-rank hunter who once got laughed at for training a discipline everyone called a dead end, and further into something the story hasn't finished naming yet. The battle surges again, bigger, faster, more devastating than the exchange before it, and the ground around them finally gives way entirely, the crater deepening into something closer to a small canyon carved directly out of what used to be Choi's home. Neither fighter shows any sign of stopping. If anything, both of them look like they've found exactly the kind of opponent they didn't know they were looking for. And that's exactly where this story leaves them. Mid-collision, mid-transformation, with a battle too massive now to have an easy ending. Constellations circling overhead like the whole abyss just tilted its attention toward one crater in one domain, and an angel somewhere out there finally catching a thread that might lead her straight back to the hunter her goddess lost centuries ago. Whether Choi walks away from this fight as Viragos' prisoner, Viragos' equal, or something else entirely, nobody watching this collision, human or otherwise, has any idea anymore. All anyone can say for certain is that whatever Choi Yun-sung becomes by the end of this, it's not going to look like anything the Abyss or Earth has ever produced before.